Hi everybody, welcome to this week's online lecture for the week of April 13th is the class this represents. Monday, April 13th. This is our 11th lecture. I hope everyone's doing well, staying healthy and safe out there, and I hope these lectures are helping you. Again, if you have any questions regarding this lecture or any prior lectures, please be sure to email me. And I am trying to check my email several times through the day. And I'll get back to you, and we can work together. At this point in the course, based on what I sent you out an email, I guess a week and a half ago or longer, somewhere between that and 2 weeks, we've just completed test 2, and I've sent you the lab instructions and the lab files for lab 2, so you can access that on Canvas. You should have Pro Tools installed. If you don't have it installed yet, you really want to get it done. I have mentioned in the instructions that you have to have set up an appointment with me if you're having trouble installing Pro Tools completely this week to get it operational. Some of you have gotten it operational. Some of you have met with, at least online met with, and it's worked out great, and we got you up and running. But the lab is now online. It's due in 2 weeks from April 13th. I believe that should be the 27th. Yep. So it's due. You have 2 weeks, plenty of time to do it. However, if you don't have Pro Tools installed, it's not always the easiest thing, as some of you already know. There's a lot of things we normally would take care of for students at Brookdale, so you don't have to be bogged down with basically getting the system up and running and all of the implementation of Pro Tools to the system it's on configured properly. So we usually take care of that. We're kind of in this crisis where you need to do it, as you know. There's sometimes hiccups. So make sure you try to install Pro Tools if you want the extra 15 points. If you want me to help you, that's no problem. Set up a time this week. Even if we can't do it this week, let's set an appointment up because it's going to be due in 2 weeks, and I can't be troubleshooting you when this is due in a day. So make sure you get on top of that if you're planning to do, which I hope you are, the second lab. Let's get Pro Tools up and running. We can do it again through Zoom. It works pretty well. I've helped several students so far. And again, you may have Pro Tools operational at this point. When you download the lab, you may have you're likely, I hate to say this, likely to have a problem getting audio due to a simple issue, but you may not be aware of it, which is not your fault. It's configuration. It's something that you may not be aware of that has to get configured. If you can't get audio, please email me. I will set up a session and we will get you rocking and rolling with Pro Tools on your system. All right? That's about it right now. So we are going to journey into our next lecture here. Shouldn't be a big one. And again, we'll get into Pro Tools to demo this stuff after this part of the lecture. Okay? So this is April 13th. We're going to talk about something called M.I.D.I, which is an acronym, M.I.D.I, and we're going to talk about what that means. Some of you have experience with M.I.D.I. Some of you have never heard of this in your life, and that's okay. We are not getting heavily into M.I.D.I based on the scope of this course. It's primarily focused on acoustic recording. However, to not include one lecture on M.I.D.I would be sort of ignorant in a class like this because it's so prevalent in its use, and it's used in tandem with acoustic recording. M.I.D.I also can be used on its own, but it's as in this exact song we've done, I threw some M.I.D.I in that you're going to see because of how applicable it was to work in conjunction with actual acoustically recorded audio tracks. So we're going to talk about M.I.D.I, and I'll jump into the first slide to explain what M.I.D.I stands for. So M.I.D.I, Musical Instrument Digital Interface. That's the actual where M.I.D.I came from in its terminology. It's a musical instrument digital interface is what it stands for. And we'll elaborate on that in a second. M.I.D.I became very, very popular in the late or the mid to late 1980s, and has been used ever since. And let's explain what it is, and then we'll talk a little more about it. It's a digital communication language that allows electronic instruments and/or software to communicate with each other. So it's sort of a language, M.I.D.I. It is. It's standardized. And I underline that in the idea that you want to think about M.I.D.I as a language that exists in audio technology. Just like I put an XLR connection, for example. XLR connections have become a standard, been a standard a long time now. So when manufacturers, all these different manufacturers create products to sell. When they say XLR connection, it means that any other system that has an XLR connection, they will work. Same concept with MIDI. MIDI is not a manufacturer, and it's not owned essentially by any one company. In fact, MIDI probably, I actually don't know this, I could look it up, and I'm not testing you on it, obviously. MIDI was created by a company and was proprietary at some point before it became mainstream, which is very, very common. Kind of like medication. When a pharmaceutical company makes a medication, at a certain point, other companies are licensed and allowed to do it. Different industry, but the premise is similar. MIDI now is a standard, and many manufacturers will say whether MIDI is actually can be utilized in their product by saying MIDI on it. But it's a standardized protocol. So that's the initial introduction. It's a language that allows electronic instruments to communicate. So we're only dealing with electronic instruments. We're not dealing with acoustic anything in this case. Acoustic guitars, not applicable. Piano, not applicable. Electronic piano, we'll get to that in a second. Bass guitar, acoustic drums, all of these things are acoustic, not going to be applicable to MIDI. Electronic drums can be very applicable. Some keyboards can be very applicable, and we'll move on to that. Okay, so what advantages does MIDI offer? In a nutshell, because again, we're looking at the overall scope of this in a general sense. We're not going to dive into this. Some of you have Pro Tools classes are using MIDI a lot, which is great. Our classes focus more acoustic, so we're just going to touch on this so you want to understand it. So in a nutshell, it offers more musical control and sound manipulation. That's what you're kind of getting. Allows the user to change sounds and tonal quality without having to re-record a musical passage. And that's a big positive with MIDI. And just to clarify, what it means is that musical control and sound manipulation is pretty general. We're going to elaborate on it, but one strength of MIDI is that we could have a musician perform a musical piece. And let's use a piano or a keyboard as the tool, as the instrument. So we could have a musician record, and let's say a challenging musical score, something pretty challenging to play. A very good musician plays it on the keyboard, and we're utilizing MIDI. Well, the cool thing is, one basic, simple, cool thing is, once that musician has finished recording it, the part is now stored in this MIDI language, we'll call it, but we can instantly change the sounds or tonal quality. But sounds is even bigger than tonal quality, because a compressor can change the tonal quality through an acoustic recording, of course. But we can change the sound, and pretty dramatically. With MIDI, the performance information gets recorded. The sound does not. And at first, that may seem a little odd to those who are brand new to this. But what happens is when that musician plays MIDI recording, they may be using a keyboard, what's called a keyboard MIDI controller. They may be playing on a traditional piano keyboard, the parts. And what's actually being stored is how they played it, not the actual sound. When they struck a key, how hard they struck a key on the keyboard, and things like that. So that gets recorded, and what we can do with MIDI is, without having to call the musician back in, we could change the instrument from the sound of a keyboard or piano to any sound the system we're working on offers. So we could make it sound like, in a lot of cases, we could make what that person played sound like a guitar, sound like an electric guitar, sound like a trumpet, sound like a saxophone, an oboe, sound like a flute, pick an instrument. If it's available in MIDI, the performance has been recorded, not the sound. So we can change it instantly, which can cause a lot of dramatic changes to what was played just by changing the instrument. So this is a big generality of what is advantageous about MIDI. Now, important thing for you to take, well, test question potentially, hint, hint. MIDI does not communicate or store audio signals. Okay, this is a biggie. And some students always miss this, and that's why I underlined it. Don't miss this one. MIDI does not communicate or store audio signals. It's storing data. It's digital language storing data that this MIDI protocol that has been created has been standardized to manufacturers to utilize and communicate and store data. It instructs a device to create or play a sound. So it's telling a device, some sort of device, I want you to play this sound, play the sound now, at this time, with this intensity. It's a data protocol that communicates parameters that a MIDI device can easily, essentially, perform. So think of we always use the old piano player role. If you think of that old Western, the old Westerns with the, or self-playing pianos, I'm sure you've seen it in a movie or maybe in person somewhere, where it plays by itself. The keys go down by itself and it plays music. Well, there's a scroll with little it's paper scroll that have indentations that trigger when the piano key should go down. So when you when they wind that scroll and play it within a certain consistent time, you get the old ragtime piano sound. The piano could be played by a person live or by the scroll triggering it, but it's happening in real time, meaning that piano scroll, when that piano scroll starts rolling and triggering the old time keys to go, you're hearing the sound not recorded actually occur in real time. MIDI is very, very similar to that premise, that idea. If you're storing the instructions in MIDI, you're storing those instructions. When it comes time to play them, when you hit play on the transport in Pro Tools, when you click it, and the transport starts moving, just like we've done and you've experienced with audio files, well, instead of playing back a recorded audio file, you're actually playing in real time MIDI instructions that are triggering sounds to occur at that time. The only thing recorded is the data and instructions, not audio, at least at this point. And that's an important distinction to make with MIDI. That's what gives MIDI its power, too, because that's what allows us to change the sound. So let's say we have a system where we have sounds being played through MIDI, and it's set to a piano, and the musician performs it. The instructions are stored in Pro Tools, which you're going to see again in this lecture, and then we play it back, and it plays back what we recorded, the instructions. But that's what gives us the power to go into the sound, change the sound, and all that's happening is when we play it back, since the instructions are recorded, it's playing back instructions identical, but it's triggering a different sound because we've gone into the sounds menu and changed it. So it's really, really, really cool. Okay, so now the MIDI data channels, and what we mean when I say that are the tracks. When we kind of think of a track of audio, which you're familiar with, we can kind of think of MIDI, and they kind of built it, at least visually, with the MIDI used to be hardware-based completely before software became so popular. But now that software is popular, they visually are similar to Pro Tools audio tracks. So they look similar to that. Again, they store information, and I know I'm kind of hitting you on the head on that with this concept, but I want to make sure you understand it. Some of you already have experience in MIDI, but a lot of you probably do not if you haven't taken a Pro Tools class. So when you select play on the transport, the MIDI information on the track triggers a sound. Whoop, misspelling right there. But that's a D. It triggers a sound in real time. Okay, that's what I've said leading up to this slide. Once a performance has occurred and the data is recorded by the musician, as I said, you can easily change the instrument's sound or adjust the way the musician performed the musical passage via MIDI. So you can actually have a performance, and when the musician leaves, imagine we brought in this great musician, maybe we had to pay this musician a lot of money, very, very skilled musician, does a very challenging piece of music, leaves the studio. We need to make some changes here. We don't need that musician to come back in and re-record or do anything, unless there's a dramatic problem in the recording. That musician has left, and we have all the data, the way they played it. So we can just change instruments. We could change the tone, the whole sound of the piano he played on or she played on. We could change anything. We could actually go in and do some surgical manipulation, which you'll see in the video too. So MIDI gives a lot more control over the sound than if we recorded a piano and then could apply compression or noise gate or whatever equalization, which we can apply to MIDI too, but we're stuck with that sound. We're stuck with that recording. That's what we got. Okay, MIDI sequencing, MIDI sequencer. The software application for MIDI data to be stored and manipulated in Pro Tools. That's kind of what this means. MIDI sequencer is if MIDI is being utilized in another DAW or hardware, there's a MIDI sequencer in all of them. I'm saying Pro Tools to keep things simple for this class. But it's any DAW or any hardware that deals with MIDI. There's typically a sequencer. So the data is laid out similar to audio tracks, but show performance information for the MIDI instrument rather than recorded audio. And you're going to see that once we get to the part of this lecture where I'm in front of Pro Tools. All right, so you want to write that down or record that in your notes. But that's MIDI sequence. It's called MIDI sequencing, or sequencer is the item that does it. And the next slides are going to show you some basic MIDI, what we call programming. All right, let's move on there. Okay. So we have a MIDI controller interface. This is the piece of hardware that can trigger the MIDI information by the user, by the piano player in our case. And a MIDI keyboard, which is our example, is the big one utilized, meaning you're going to come across a MIDI keyboard a lot. But a MIDI foot switch is an example of something that's a MIDI but not a keyboard, used to trigger other types of effects through another piece of hardware. You could have MIDI drums. Electronic drums could be MIDI. A lot of different electronic instruments or controls can be through this protocol of MIDI. Let me give you an example of the foot switch. I have a foot switch for if I'm in a live performance and I'm doing a small performance where I don't have a sound engineer. It's very common in live performances that during dialogue of a performance where there's not music being especially sung or vocals, that you want to turn off any effects like reverb or delay or any effects to the voice. So the dialogue can be completely understood by the audience without any echo or anything, and then turn back on for songs. Well, I actually use a couple MIDI foot switches that, with programming the MIDI, allow me, by hitting that switch, it tells the digital mixing system, hey, turn off the reverb. Hit another button on it, on the foot switch. Turn it back on. Turn it off, turn it off. We could actually, my foot switch does about 6 different changes I've programmed it to do. Increases in amplitude for certain things. All done through this MIDI protocol that the system, the foot switch, the controller, and the actual mixing system it's plugged into both speak MIDI. So they understand what you're saying, you just got to program it. MIDI keyboard's the big one, I'm going to show you that in a second. And we connect that into a MIDI sequencer. All right. Let me show you this before we go to that slide now. So here's my little tiny MIDI keyboard. This is I don't actually get to do a lot of MIDI, so I don't have and I'm also I'm a guitar player over piano, so I'm not a super good piano player. So I have this little guy that I'll do I'm just getting the camera here, very simple MIDI stuff with. I know it looks at first glance like a toy, this does. Looks like a little Casio keyboard toy. It's actually very powerful when used in conjunction with MIDI. This, if you look, does not have any audio connections. I know, let me see if I can get closer to the screen. There's no audio connections anywhere on this guy. Now you will find MIDI controllers that do have audio connections. That just means that it has more capability than this one. This is about 80 bucks. This is not very expensive. Again, for my purposes, for teaching and for the small amount of MIDI I personally do for projects, this thing is perfect. This is 80 bucks, no big deal, but you can buy a MIDI controller that's in the thousands. Probably have more capability though. And all it has, this cable, is a good old USB cable. That's it. If I get to the end here. USB, you're all familiar, can't hold it. Boom. USB cable. It's not my mic here, hope I can hear me. This cable plugs right into a computer for connecting with Pro Tools. Again, you got to do some configuration for these guys. This is not the original connection. MIDI actually has what's called a 5-pin MIDI cable, which was really the only way to interconnect MIDI when it was hardware to hardware. Once computerized software became prevalent, manufacturers started allowing this type of USB connection because it's all digital. So once USB became a standard, they kind of switched over. But I still do use traditional MIDI cables, which are specialized cables for connecting hardware. For instance, my foot switch is not USB. It's a MIDI language through a specialized cable. But this is just USB. And what happens is once I connect this doesn't generate any sounds. This just generates instructions. So for anyone who plays piano, you know, I'm going to do a little C major chord here. When I hit the C major chord, when it's connected, it will play and record ultimately these notes. This is just a way to encode data. All of these are encoders that allow you to change parameters in the MIDI sequencer. But this is what a controller might look like. And it works very well. So when I go to the Pro Tools section of this lecture, I'll have this in front of me all hooked up, and I'll talk, as I talk through the lecture, you're going to hear the effects of me playing the notes as I try to explain and teach this. But this is what it looks like, so no big deal. But there's no audio connections on this guy. It's just a controller in the form factor of a piano. So there's many ways to input the audio, not audio, the data that triggers the audio. And I just want to talk about a couple of the popular ones in this next slide. So we have, let me see if this is the last slide. Hang on a minute. No, we don't. Okay. So we have, I wish these actually were reversed. I apologize when I was preparing today's lecture. We're going to start with the I know why I did it in this order. We're going to start with, before we even get to the slide, the general method of recording MIDI can be akin to recording any acoustic instrument, meaning that imagine, in fact, when I did record, I already have recorded the part in Complicated for the class. I played the song, I put this track of MIDI into record mode, and I played along on the keyboard. I played the part along. I got the sound I wanted, but I could change the sound later. But I recorded the part with the music, just like we've done in class, just like I've been doing here at home with you kind of online, recording parts, play the song just like you're familiar with. So we have that method of input, which works well and is very, very common, which leads us to this quantization part. So let's kind of talk about that, and then we'll come back to step time entry. So quantization, if you remember from different aspects of professional audio, such as sampling and quantizing and how it works, if you remember that from COMM216, it's the idea that we're quantizing is putting information in discrete locations available to the, in this case, computer, the software. And we want to do that musically too, to a degree. So the idea of quantization in this case is that Pro Tools is instructed to move each played note, when it's played, to the nearest correct time location. So for musicians, some of you may not get this, which is fine. An eighth note, a quarter note, etc., to match the correct tempo of the song. So let me just clarify. So when you can't hear because it's not hooked up to anything, but when I were to play a song on this thing, if I played Mary Had a Little Lamb, you know, it's in time to how there's timing for everything. That's how we all know Mary Had a Little Lamb. But being a human, or so far I think I am, being a human, I'm prone to make some degree of mistakes. And I think I mentioned this, I've already actually recorded the Pro Tools section for this lecture, and I think I mentioned it there too. So not to be too redundant, but we could have a big philosophical discussion on timing and the naturalness that incorrect timing brings to music, because music is a human construct. So this quantization thing, philosophically, some people might be very critical of, which is understandable, because we are now taking those mistakes and having a computer correct them. We're not going to talk about philosophy of music here. That's not my goal to teach you, but it is something I'm aware of, and you should be too. I just want to explain that you can do this, that this is done, and sometimes it's needed to be done for certain styles of music, especially when you're doing dance music, where the timing, impeccable timing is really important when the music goal is to incite dancing. So, but this is an important tool because, especially when we do percussion with MIDI, which is very common, we want the timing with the percussion pretty much accurate, pretty much to that what we call click track, right onto whatever the tempo of the song is. So Pro Tools can actually, in two common methods, Pro Tools can actually relocate mistakes made by the performer. Let me show you. So we have sort of two big options here. We can do it after we've recorded. So after we've recorded, we can what's called snap to the grid, the digital grid within any DAW that keeps time. And we can choose to snap to a note, and these are different examples of notes for anyone who's not a musician. Quarter note, eighth note, half note, whole note. You've probably heard these if you're not a musician. Anyone who is a musician already is on board, but you've probably heard these types of durations of notes. So what we can do is, after we've recorded it, we can tell the system, hey, correct these mistakes. And boom, it'll correct the mistake. It's really cool. You'll see that as you go on in this lecture. The second thing, which is pretty cool, is what's called input quantizing. And you want to just understand what this means. Through the event operations in Pro Tools, we can actually affect placement of the notes during the actual recording. So when I have my little keyboard and I'm recording a part, as I'm doing it, if I make a mistake that's not blatant, but my timing is a little off, the computer will fix it on the spot as I go. It's input quantizing. It's aligning those mistakes immediately. Now again, as you hopefully watch this whole video and I get into Pro Tools, you're going to see this happen. I don't believe I did input quantizing, but I definitely did post. And you're going to see it happen and hopefully get a better understanding, because for anyone who's brand new to this topic, you may be still a little like, okay, I think I get it. When you see the second half of this video, hopefully you will. So these are the two big quantizing options. There's a few other methods too we could talk about, but these are the ones I want you to have an understanding of. But it realigns mistakes. It's really, really helpful to try to capture an accurate recording, especially with percussion. All right, let's go back a slide. Here's another method which is really cool. But and this will be utilized at different times for different reasons. It's called step time entry. So let's kind of say it. You can jot it down, and then we'll talk about it for a second. So the notes can be entered into a sequence without having to manage correct timing of the music, which is actually an understatement. But upon playback, the sequencer will play back at the session's original tempo. So that's accurate, but let me elaborate. Step time entry doesn't, when you utilize a DAW or Pro Tools and set up MIDI in a step time entry setting, which is a setting you'd have to do, when you do that, you don't have to play the part, be able to play the part, which ironically is the whole challenge and wonder of music, is when you see a great musician, you know, piano player, whatever, it doesn't matter the instrument, just take piano. A really good piano player can just sail over the keys. It's mesmerizing. It's why we, as people, enjoy this. When we see it, it's really cool. It's accomplished. But there may be some reasons where you need to record a part that you're not able to play, that you don't have the skill to do. But you may want to do it anyway, or you may need to do it as a writer for a musician who is capable to re-record it later organically. So we have the step time entry. You can tell the system what length note you want and what actual letter name note you want. So for instance, you can tell the system, hey, I want you to play the note A for a quarter note. And again, if you don't understand A and quarter note, don't worry, just understand that's a musical expression. I want you to play A at a quarter note. The next note I want is B, and I want that played for a half note. And the next note I want is C, and I want that played for a 16th note. So there's all different types of durations and letters. You can just program it, and you're going to see this in the lab, in this lecture. You're going to see this happen. It's really cool, because what happens is you tell the system what note and how long to play it, and then when you hit play, it's going to play it. It's really cool because typically the faster music occurs, the more challenging it is to play. Anyone who plays an instrument knows that already. So you can write some really, and hear back some really cool musical ideas using step time entry, because you can tell it what to do, but you don't have to play it. Now some of you may say, if it's playing it for you, that's cheating. You're not playing it. It depends what question is being asked, and there's reason for this. First thing is, it's not cheating in what you write, because you're still writing the music. if you're the composer. So that's not true. But if you then said, I can or have, I performed this, I played it, that would be cheating. That would be not true. So it depends what question's being asked of you. But again, why would this happen? Again, you may have a piano player that you're writing for, or a musician, and you're writing music. And by doing it this way with step time entry, you can get the vision across, and then the musician can come in and record it organically. Or again, if you don't have a budget for a musician and you want to get your idea across, you have step time entry, so you can do it. Whether you admit to whether you played it live or not that's you and your own personal ethics. But you are writing it, so it depends what question you're asking. But I do get that often said, hey, isn't that cheating? You're not really playing it. Performance-wise, supposedly, writing-wise, no. All right, so that concludes where we are with, that should be last slide, yeah, for lecture portion of MIDI. Let's now head into the lab and look directly at Pro Tools and how we can implement this with our song for the class.
All right, everybody, so we are in Pro Tools here, and we are looking at this is not our class session, that we're working on right now. I just opened up a fresh session and just threw in a MIDI track to explain this so it's more clear, especially to those who are newer to this topic. So let's first thing I want to explain is we have a standard plugin that we're using with MIDI here that comes with Pro Tools, and there's a lot of plugins that you can utilize regarding MIDI. This one is called Expand, and I believe it comes standard on most Pro Tools. And if you look up here to the upper left here, I have it set as an insert. I've inserted this MIDI plugin so we can access it in this track. So this volume works like it normally does, and this is the actual plugin itself. It's not the MIDI sequencer, though. We're going to get to that in a second. This is actually what generates the sounds. So if you look here, there's a ton of them. And these are actually pretty good sounds. There's, like I said, there's always a company making software that wants you to buy their software, and they have the best sounds, of course, and there's different pricing, etc. Of course, you buy what fits your budget and what your project that you're working on, is the scope of it is going to dictate how much you can spend on plugins. But for something that's standard, this is pretty good. But all these are different sounds that you can pick from. And if I generate a sound real quick, now the keyboard I showed you, I have hooked up right now to the computer, and I've configured it. So I'm going to hit a little sound here, and I'm just triggering that sound from the keyboard that I showed you. A little chord there. Let me make it a little louder. Okay, hopefully that you can hear that. I'm just playing that on the little keyboard. No big deal. And at first glance, you might go, oh, whoopity-doo. So I've seen the keyboards a million times, which at this point makes sense. But let me just show you how we can change the sound. Let's go to an organ sound, and we'll click this one, and I'll play the same notes. And we have an organ. And again, we're not really at MIDI yet. Let's go to guitar. Whoops, I'm just illustrating some basics. Let's try this one. Whoops. Okay, nice little sound there, no big deal. But you can play, we're not going to get into, there's a lot here that this plugin offers, and again, scope of this course, especially MIDI, because this course is primarily focused on acoustic recording, but MIDI, we want to spend one lecture on, and MIDI, there's a lot to it, but we want you to understand and comprehend the overview of MIDI, and we are going to apply some MIDI. I've already done it for this class, which I'm going to show you today. After I demo the MIDI, I'm going to show you how it applies to our actual session. So we have different sounds that we can play on the controller. Ooh, that's a drum sound. That's a bad example. Here we'll do a vocal. Let's see what this sounds like. All right, so you get it. All right, so let's go further. And again, there's a track right here. Disregard this. This is just a click track I was set up when I was testing this before recording. But this is all this one track we're triggering it from. You can actually see the level indicator. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so we're now on the we're in the edit view. And I've recorded a quick passage here, and I'm going to show you how I actually made this, but I'm going to use this to demo first. And again, there's no other tracks here, but these little lines you see represent MIDI data and instruction. Now, what you'd see from experience are other audio tracks, and when we open this up in the session we're working on for the class with the song Complicated, you'll see my MIDI track, but you also see all these other tracks of audio that you're more familiar with. But obviously, as you look, I'm going to zoom in here. This is looks very different. Whoops, wrong button. There we go. This looks very different than an audio track, of course, and it is. This is information. This is that digital information I was talking about in the lecture. These lines represent information to the computer, and these lines represent how long and where a note is played. So again, that's sort of like that piano roll concept. So let me play this real. Let me go back to a shorter sound. Let me see if I can find a good. All right, so this will sound kind of cool. So I'm going to play this. This is actually pretty quick. So I'm just going to simply play it like we would a audio tracks, and it's going to play what it sees. Okay, no big deal. Just some C scale up and down two octaves, and it's got that weird thin whine sound, it says, which it is kind of whiny. But the cool thing about MIDI is these are the instructions, and this is the instrument. This whole plugin, this plugin here is the instrument. So if we go to, let's try hard lead. Let's pick one. I wish I could have you guys in class. Normally I tell you guys, hey, pick one. So I'll pick Digi-Lead. Let's see what that sounds like. I'm gonna play it. Okay. Notice again, the musician didn't have to replay this with a new sound. The performance is here, but the sound changes based on the plugin. Really cool. Let's try again another. I don't want to beat this to death, but I just want you guys to understand this. This is actually kind of, let's try soft fizzle. It's really cool if you think about it. Totally different sound, softer volume, which we can adjust. All these parameters we can adjust. And there's a lot of adjustments in here that I'm not going to drill you on because it's going to pull away from the overall objective of just getting you accustomed to some things with MIDI. But again, we can go to hard brass, and let's see what that sounds like. It's kind of like a weird trumpet or something. But again, you have all of these instruments, and you're changing the instrument, but you don't have to have the performer re-perform it on that instrument. That's what makes MIDI so powerful, is that the performance is what is stored, not the instrument. Where everything we've done outside of MIDI, we have stored actual audio from an instrument, so the guitar, the bass, the drums, etc. We can manipulate the tonal qualities, but we cannot manipulate the actual performance much, and we cannot manipulate the actual sound by very much. We can completely change the sound with MIDI without having to re-record it over and over. And what's great is it gives the producer or the musician the ability to sample many different sounds with this performance without having to re-perform it over and over and over again, especially in the case where you have a perfect performance. You have a musician who's recorded it exactly the way you want it, but you're not happy with the instrument sound. So to go from a guitar, let's say we picked an acoustic guitar, we could go to a trumpet, which is crazy, which is utterly crazy. If we had a guitar player and wanted it to sound like a trumpet, we'd have to bring in a trumpet player who could play this. Not with MIDI. We can just change, going back to here, we can find a trumpet sound, and boom, sounds like trumpet. All right, let's look at our next feature of MIDI. Okay, so let's, what's really cool is we're going to take this musical passage. Again, these are instructions, and when we do play this, when I hit play, the instructions are triggering this insert in real time. And another way, again, for those who are new to this, to think of this is when we put an insert in, take a look over here, when we put an insert in the inserts of a compressor or a noise gate or whatever we're using, and we have our recorded audio, those are real-time effects occurring in real time, meaning when the kick drum is played from, let's use the kick drum as an example for that track. When it's played, when you hit play and the kick drum goes, in real time, it's going through that compressor. It hasn't changed the original file, and we've talked about that in past lectures. Same thing here. All that's happening is this information here is being played in real time in this insert. If I took this insert away, we wouldn't hear anything. So what's cool though, let's go up here and take a look, and we can cut this out. We're going to cut the whole thing. I'm going to start fresh. Empty, no big deal. Let's pull up the sequencer, and we can take a look. They call it the MIDI editor here. So we have a piano thing here, representation of a keyboard, and I can actually click and hear a note. Okay, but I can also play it here on my keyboard, which you cannot see. I'm just playing the keyboard I showed you. Okay, no big deal. So let's do a simple recording, and it'd be very similar to recording audio tracks. I'm going to hit record here on the master transport. I do want to jump back to the mix window and enable the track, and then we're going to do a basic recording of this sound I've chosen. Now remember, I'm not recording the sound, I'm recording the performance. The sound is hard nylon string. It'll sound like that, but we can change that instantly. Take a look. I'll just play some chords together, nothing crazy. Okay, we're recording. Okay, we'll stop it. No big deal. Let me zoom out. I think I'm there. Okay, so what this recorded was everything but the actual tone, which is in here. So what we have recorded here are the 3 notes I hit at the same time, and this was recorded in real time with I didn't have the click track or anything to quantize like we talked about, which I'm going to do next, to get the timing perfect, but we'll come back to that. We can play it. And again, you're hearing this trigger in real time. See this thing? See the level right here? So we can let's just change instruments now to re-illustrate that. We'll do let's do hard tenor sax. It's gonna sound weird, but I'm not reperforming this. It's just playing what's there. It's pretty cool. And the idea that you can do massive changes, massive sound changes, massive meaning, completely different sounds, radically different, is what is one part of why this is so powerful. Just one part of it. Piano. All right. So, good. Okay. So we know we can record in real time. We know that we can change the sounds, and we understand, hopefully, that what you've recorded is data information, not actual sounds. And let me show you one more thing, and we'll move on to quantization. I want to pull a sound that might be more obvious for what I'm going to show you. Let's see. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay. So let's take a closer look here at the first part. Whoops, went too far. Let's take a closer look here at this area here. In fact, just for a second, I'm going to slide that note over to itself so it's actually playing alone. Okay. Here's the next manipulation. If you look down here, and again, I want you to understand these conceptually. I'm not going to expect you to understand exactly where this is and how to, we're not going to get that involved in MIDI. I want you to understand this for your lab. You're going to have some manipulation that may not actually occur in MIDI. It may occur in a waveform. We'll talk about that in a second. But I want you to understand these conceptually for your final. So if we pick velocity is the big one I want to talk about, and you see these little spikes here, and each spike represents instructions. What's cool is the velocity is how hard the key was struck, and the harder the key is struck or the lighter affects the tonality of the digital sample. So if I make it, I can actually go in surgically and make this as if it was struck harder or softer. Watch. I can put it up there, and every time this note is played by the computer, it's going to have a different tonality as if it was struck on the keyboard harder. Lower it. It'll sound like that. Every time that note gets played, when I play it, here, let's do it. Watch. Oops, it goes quick, watch. Okay, now I'm going to raise the velocity. It'll sound different now. Okay, well, let's put it back. The point is you can actually go in and make all of these adjustments, these parameters, all of these. If you the producer or musician are not happy with how hard the musician hit the key in that moment of the song, you can go in and make these adjustments, and there's a lot of them. You can, at least on this in this editor, you have a lot of them, but there's even other editors that have more. But you can adjust the volume, you can adjust the pan, you can have it mute out if you want. You can do what we call bends. We can have audio, just the audio portion pan. There's so many ways to manipulate this data, where it's a lot harder to manipulate an actual audio track that's already been recorded. Again, this is just data. This is just instructions, live instructions. All right, and let's move on to quantization. All right, so let's say that well, actually, if we even look here, when I played these notes at the same time, you can take a closer look and see, as I recorded in real time, that I didn't play them perfectly. The timing of this chord, and it was intended as a chord, these three notes are meant to be played at the same time. But look, this one kind of fell late. I don't even think these are exactly lined up either. Now, there is a big philosophical discussion we could have for what I'm about to do and how it can remove the natural human error that makes music come alive and have a human element. That's for another day. There is a fair philosophical discussion on what is pleasing, what sounds created by machine versus human. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the fact of how we can essentially make this start all at the same time, because the musician, myself, didn't play it perfectly. I hit this key a little late. Hit this one maybe a little late too. So if we want a perfect chord, we can easily do that without having to re-record the data. So what we can do is we can highlight this, okay, and we can quantize. And again, quantize is just a fancy word essentially for rounding. And if we go to the quantize window here, we can tell the system we want these to be starting at the same point in time. And again, there's a lot more information I want to go into. There's a lot more information than I want to go into regarding this. I want you to understand the premise of this. So you can see these are not lined up. But let's imagine the musician, someone else played this, and the musician has left, done with his or her work, and now the producer has to fix this. You know, this happens, or the engineering team has to fix this. Well, we can. We don't need to call the musician back at all. We can go to quantize, and by playing around with the level of quantization, which I'm flipping through here, we're going to leave it at 1/64th note for illustrative purposes. But what we can do is, if you watch this, these three notes that I've selected, when I hit apply, it's going to line them all up. Here we go. Boom. Perfect. The system net was told, based on this digital grid we work within, to align these together. So when the track plays now, it'll be at the same time. Okay, well, hard to hear, but I don't like the sound I've chosen either. But the idea is that we have quantized this part of the song so it sounds at the same time. Let me go back to a guitar sound here, the nylon. Let's see. No, I don't want 12 string. Here we go, hard steel string. Okay. So it's lined up now. There's the chord. So you can see that it's pretty cool that you can have the computer help you. And again, MIDI is very useful here because it corrected an error, didn't have to re-record it, and I still can change the sound to something else. And I still can go in and change all of this information on here, the velocity, the intensity of these strings, but we've corrected the time of when it was the mistake of how it was played wrong. We've corrected that, and we can go to any part in the song and do that. Now I just selected that one part. These are all still a little off. If zoom in, we could highlight all of it and tell it to quantize, and everything. I don't know if you can see that. I did it quickly. Let me undo it. If you look closely, they'll all move. Boom. So now they're all playing in time. Let me show you one more thing. If we quantize to the wrong time, watch how much they'll jump. I'm quantizing this to a different type of note in duration. Watch what happens. The whole thing jumped and changed. This will sound same instrument, but completely different because I quantized it to a different duration that's extreme. And I expected this to happen because I'm quantizing for any musicians listening to a half note. So let me undo that. So if this is the musical passage and we don't quantize properly, we can actually change the performance. We don't want to do that. We just want to make everything at the right time. So we can quantize this to the right. I'm going to do a 30-second note. We'll see a slight change. And again, there's a little bit of an art to this and an understanding of what you're trying to, the musical passage is. So quantization takes a little practice. But I want you to understand the concept. We are just aligning these notes to the correct position that the musical score dictates and correcting musician mistakes. Okay, so let's talk about something called step time entry, which I mentioned before, and it's really cool, and it's a great way to record parts of a song that are too challenging to maybe record for the ability of the musician. If there's a passage you want recorded or need recorded, but you just don't have the ability or the musician doesn't play it, but you want that idea, musical concept in the song, we can use step time entry. So I pulled up the operation window here for this, and I'm going to disable it for a minute. So let's say I want to play a scale like this. Okay, but I want to go much faster. Okay, I want to go faster, but I can't. I'm not a piano player, really, as you obviously can tell. Okay, can't do it. So we can use step time entry here to do this for me. So we can hit enable. And now I'm in step time mode, and these musical notes represent the speed and duration of the note, how fast the notes move in music. Don't need to get caught up with this for music theory. Anyone who plays music already recognizes this. But I'm going to choose, we're going to choose, let's start with 16th notes. So 16th notes are relatively quick notes in music, generally speaking. So every note I play, it doesn't matter how fast I play each note, it's going to play it back as a 16th note. So meaning if I hit the first note, it's going to store it. Now, if I hit the second note, it's going to store it. You can see it storing this information. Remember, this is not audio. It's storing data. I'm just going to go up a C major scale. I'm going to go even more. I'm going to come down. Okay, so no big deal, but notice it did it note by note, not musical time at all, which is what I wanted. The idea is that I can't play in a musical time, so I'm going to give it instructions of what I want, where I want it. Now, if we play it back, it'll sound kind of musical. Oops, here we go. Kind of cool. If I go faster, and we continue on here, just jump to this point, I can do the same thing. Whoop. I can do it slow as I want. Doesn't matter. I'm only kind of went fast there to illustrate. Now, I hit a bad note, so we're going to get rid of that. See that note I hit? We're going to cut that right out. It's gone. So now let's play it. And you can see the duration now. These are 16th notes. I went to 32nd notes. They're faster. Let's take a listen. Let's go to the beginning. Really neat. Real basic example of step time entry. We could even go faster. We can also vary it. So we don't have to stay with these types of notes. We could do quarter notes, and then we can go. I'm forgetting where I am, but that's okay. And I'm changing these. I'm changing durations, and let's take a listen. Look how varied it is. So we can play this. I'll play from this point. Pretty cool. And let me zoom out. And again, reminder that let's imagine you have something musical that's better than what I have here. But let's imagine you have something musical that you're happy with. Let's say this is good to go. Whoops, let me move back here. But you want to, here it is this is actually on within Pro Tools now. But let's say you want a different sound. So we pop up our sound effects. Let's change it to, let's do natural grand piano. Boom. That's a piano. Again, musically boring, but the illustration hopefully is clear. Really, really cool that step time entry can help do complicated musical pieces that a musician might not be able to, and we can still get the desired result. Sometimes this is done for a professional musician when a professional musician is being written for by a producer or a songwriter. Songwriter does not necessarily have the ability, the musician will. So the songwriter says, this is what I have in my head that I need a musician to play. And we'll use step time entry to program it into Pro Tools or some DAW. And then the musician gets it, practices, and then when it comes to the official recording, we'll now come in with the instrument and perform it. Or if it's piano, because again, piano controllers are so great to change instruments, the pianist will come in and play it on the piano perfectly, and it'll be more organic. They won't need step time entry. The actual musician does it. So it's a very, very useful tool, step time entry. All right, so let's now jump to the song Complicated and show the little bit of MIDI we kind of threw in there, and how we can turn that into actually an audio wave file for manipulation. Okay, so let's take a look at our class project. So we have our session up here with we're through the electric guitars, and again, at this point, if you're watching this lecture during the week of the 13th, you should have gotten the lab assignment. And again, the lab assignment's only going to have the drums, bass, and acoustics. Your third lab, that's lab 2, your third lab is going to have this with some other things that you're going to need to do when you hand in your third lab. We'll get to that later. But we have everything, and we have some over here, a synth track. Now disregard the one that says synth A. I'm going to explain that in a second. Let's look at the one that says synth M, and that stands for MIDI, synth MIDI. And let's go over to the edit window, and let's take a look at what's going on here. So if we take a look, we have all our audio tracks, nothing unique here. You should be on board with everything going on. We did our electrics last week. So if we look over here, though, you can see the distinct visual of the MIDI track. And I'm going to zoom in. And here we go. So again, what's happening here is this is MIDI data I've recorded. This is not audio waves. And this is instructions given to the system to play through this plugin. And I got a pretty close match of the strings. So let's take a listen to everything, then we'll solo it and listen more closely. Let's take a listen. All right, great. So if we look closely here, we can see I played this, and we zoom. Whoops. Let's try to zoom into that. So we have that instructions here, and we have this essentially MIDI data. And if we open up the editor, we can take a closer look as well. Oops, look at that window open. There it is. This is what I played into the system. We can solo it, of course, and take a listen. Okay, we can then manipulate, actually the timing is a little off, so I could go in and quantize this to fix the location so it's more accurate to the song. So and we, of course, like I said, the nice thing is we can go into the plugin and change the sound from soft legato strings to whatever we want. We could just change it, don't have to perform it again, so it's really great. But what I want to show you, the last thing I want to show you for today, is how we can convert this to an audio file, because we can keep it in its raw form like this, and until we are ready to do a final mix down of this song into a stereo track. We could, and we do, but there's times where you may want to convert this to an audio file, and you're essentially committing to the sound. And for your third lab, that's what I'm planning to do. So let me show you how we can actually do that. It's kind of cool and relatively simple. There are multiple methods to do this. I want to show you this simple one because I think intuitively it makes the most sense, but there's other ways to do it too. So if we, I put another track here, and we'll call this A for audio, synth audio waves, synth MIDI, synth audio. So this is where the audio is going to lay. And using the bus system, we can basically direct this sound and record it here. So if we actually arm this track to record, and we arm the system, I've already kind of done the work. I'm going to show you the mix menu here. And what I did was, these are the tracks we're looking at, and I'm sending this to bus 3 and 4, an open bus, and I set this to unity gain, and bus 3 and 4 is coming into this track. So that's the input of the track. So if I record it, it's going to record whatever's in bus 3 and 4. There's nothing else in bus 3 and 4, which is good. We just want to convert this to an audio wave through a manual method like this, so I can illustrate it to you. So it's pretty cool. So if we record, if I record this track and we take a look, let's go back to the edit menu. We can record the actual sound. Watch.
She yelling for, lay back, it's all been done before. And
Okay, great. So we raise the volume. We can see. Oh, look, we got it. So let's mute the MIDI track, and let's turn off the record here, and let's play this. So this track is muted now. We're going to just play this with it and hear what it sounds like. Should sound identical. Yep, a little too loud. There we go. Okay, so let's take a quick closer look here. Let me zoom in. So all we did was we made a waveform out of it. Let me try to make that wider. We took the instructions and we committed to it. I just want to move back and make this a little bigger, the gain here. All right, just to visualize it. So, and I got lost. All right, where are we? There we are. So take a look. It's pretty cool. We have essentially rendered, is the way we can kind of look at this. We have rendered this track from instructions playing through a plugin to actual recorded sound. This secondary track is audio. It is storing digital audio. So we now cannot, down here, I cannot change the instrument. I can up here if I want to redo it, but I could delete this track now because I don't need it anymore. Okay, so now I've deleted the track. My synth audio track is left over, and I can manipulate it just as if with volume or anything else, just like all of these other audio tracks we have. Same exact thing. It has been converted to actual audio now. There is no plugin anymore. We've changed it to an actual audio track. And again, outside of memory, latency, resources, reasons like that, or in a case where I may not know if, for instance, in class, I don't know if everyone's going to have the expand plugin for manipulating MIDI. At this point, I'm actually looking into it because I don't want to assign that in the lab if not everyone has it. So I may convert it, and then you can mix this in as an audio wave file. And I'll make that decision shortly, but the point is I have both options here. For my application, I may need to convert this to a wave file so that the people who are going to mix this, in my case, my students, can do it if they don't have Expand, the plugin. So there are reasons you may want to do it. I could have left it in its original form, and I could leave it in its original form, and I could actually go to mix with MIDI, which is COMM2. It's number of factors will help decide what you're going to do in any given production based on resources, time, budget, and all the constraints that go into this field. Okay, that concludes today's lecture on MIDI. Again, if you are having any issues, make sure you email me regarding the course. I hope you guys are utilizing these lectures. Your second lab is out there now, and if you have questions about it, you should have Pro Tools installed. If you don't, I can help you. If you're having problems with Pro Tools, we do want to set up a visual session through Zoom, and I will help you get it operational. We'll continue on into our next lecture. If you have any questions or, again, any concerns about due dates or timeline, it is not on Canvas correct on the syllabus page, obviously due to this online learning, but I did send that detailed email with all due dates. If you have any concerns, send me an email, and I hope you enjoyed today's lecture, and we'll speak online, or I will talk to you at next week's lecture when it goes up. Have a great week, everybody. Stay safe.